The black sedan sat idling outside the Castellano mansion like a patient predator, its engine purring with the quiet confidence of expensive machinery. Behind the wheel, Don Lorenzo Benedetto adjusted his chauffeur's cap and checked his reflection in the rearview mirror one final time. The uniform fit perfectly, the false mustache looked natural, and the thick glasses completed his transformation from one of New York's most feared crime bosses into an unremarkable hired driver. At 38, Lorenzo had built his empire on information, understanding that knowledge was more valuable than territory, more powerful than violence, and infinitely more useful than fear. Today's deception wasn't about business, however. It was about the woman he was supposed to marry in 6 weeks, the beautiful stranger who had agreed to become his wife, sight unseen. Isabella Castellano was 25 years old, educated in Switzerland, and reportedly one of the most sought-after brides in their world. The marriage had been arranged by their families to unite two powerful factions, but Lorenzo had insisted on one unusual condition. He wanted to meet his future wife before the wedding, to understand the woman who would share his name and his secrets. What he hadn't told anyone was that he wanted to meet her as she truly was, not as she would present herself to Don Lorenzo Benedetto. "Giuseppe," he had told his most trusted advisor, "I need you to arrange for Isabella Castellano to need a driver today. Someone reliable but forgettable, someone she'll feel comfortable ignoring." The plan was simple. Lorenzo would spend one day as Isabella's driver, observing her natural behavior, listening to her unguarded conversations, learning whether the woman he was about to marry was someone he could trust with his life and his heart. The front door of the mansion opened, and Isabella Castellano stepped into the autumn morning like a vision from a Renaissance painting. She was more beautiful than her photographs suggested, with dark hair that caught the sunlight and moved like silk, elegant features that belonged in marble galleries, and a grace that made every movement seem choreographed. But it was her eyes that stopped Lorenzo's breath. Dark brown, intelligent, and touched with a sadness that her smile couldn't quite hide. "Are you the driver my father arranged?" she asked, approaching the car with the kind of confidence that came from never having to doubt her own worth. "Yes, Miss Giuseppe Moretti, at your service." Lorenzo kept his voice carefully neutral, his accent thick enough to suggest working-class roots. "Where would you like to go today? The Metropolitan Museum first, then lunch at Café Sabarsky, and finally shopping on Fifth Avenue. I have quite a busy day planned." As Isabella settled into the back seat, Lorenzo caught a glimpse of her in the mirror. She was checking her appearance in a small compact, her expression serious and focused in a way that suggested this wasn't simply vanity, but preparation for performance. "First time in the city in a while, miss?" Lorenzo asked as they pulled into traffic. "Several months. I've been in Europe finishing my education." Her voice carried the slight accent of someone who had learned multiple languages, cultured but not affected. "Today is my last day of freedom before I become engaged to a man I've never met." Lorenzo's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "An arranged marriage? The most arranged marriage imaginable. My father and Don Benedetto have been negotiating the terms for months. I'm told he's powerful, wealthy, and appropriately aged. Beyond that, I know nothing about the man who will control my entire future. And how do you feel about that?" Isabella was quiet for a moment, and Lorenzo watched her reflection as she stared out the window at the city passing by. "How I feel about it is irrelevant. This marriage will secure my family's position and create an alliance that benefits both our organizations. My personal feelings are a luxury neither family can afford." "But surely your father wants you to be happy." "My father wants me to be useful. Happiness is something I'll have to find within the boundaries of usefulness. Lorenzo felt something twist in his chest at the resignation in her voice. And if Don Benedetto turns out to be cruel, unkind, then I'll endure it with dignity and find ways to make a meaningful life despite my circumstances. Women in our world learn early that survival often requires accepting situations we cannot change. You sound like you've given this considerable thought. I've had my entire life to think about it. From the moment I was old enough to understand what family I was born into, I knew that love would be a secondary consideration to politics and power. They had reached the museum, but Lorenzo found himself reluctant to end the conversation. Miss, if you don't mind me asking, is there anyone you would choose to marry if the choice were yours? Isabella's reflection smiled, but it was a sad expression that made Lorenzo's heart ache. There was someone once, a young professor I met at university, kind, intelligent, passionate about literature and history. He wrote me poetry and talked about changing the world through education. What happened to him? I came home for Christmas and my father explained the facts of life to me. Professor Marcus would never be acceptable to our family. Continuing, the relationship would put him in considerable danger and make my own future impossible. So you ended it? I never returned to Switzerland. I finished my education through correspondence and private tutors, and Professor Marcus never learned why the woman he thought he loved simply vanished from his life. Lorenzo pulled up to the museum entrance, his mind reeling from what he had learned in just 20 minutes. The woman he was supposed to marry was intelligent, thoughtful, capable of deep feeling, and completely resigned to a loveless marriage with a man she viewed as a powerful stranger. Will you be long at the museum, miss? An hour, perhaps 2. I want to spend time with the Renaissance collection. It may be my last opportunity to see art that celebrates love and beauty instead of power and possession. As Isabella disappeared into the museum, Lorenzo sat in the idling car and tried to process the emotions churning in his chest. He had expected to find a pampered society girl who viewed their marriage as an opportunity for advancement. Instead, he had discovered a woman who saw it as a beautiful prison, who had already sacrificed one love for family duty and was preparing to sacrifice her entire future for the same cause. The worst part was realizing that she was right to be afraid. Don Lorenzo Benedetto, the man she was preparing to marry, was indeed powerful and wealthy. He was also dangerous, surrounded by violence and capable of ruthlessness that would terrify most people. But he was also, Lorenzo was beginning to realize, possibly in love with a woman who would marry him despite expecting nothing but duty and endurance in return. When Isabella returned to the car 90 minutes later, her expression was more composed, but somehow sadder. The Renaissance painters understood something we've forgotten, she said, as they drove toward their lunch destination. They painted love as if it were the most important force in the universe, as if it mattered more than money or power or family alliances. Do you think they were wrong? I think they were fortunate to live in a world where such idealism was possible, even if it was just in art. And you don't think such idealism is possible now? Isabella was quiet for a long moment. I think love is still the most important force in the universe. I just don't think it's available to everyone. Some of us are born into circumstances that require us to choose duty over desire, family over personal happiness. That sounds lonely. It is. But loneliness is preferable to the destruction that comes from putting personal wants ahead of family needs. My marriage to Don Benedetto will protect my parents, secure my siblings' futures, and strengthen both our families. That's worth more than my personal romantic dreams. Lorenzo felt his heart breaking with every word. The woman sitting behind him was preparing to marry him as an act of noble sacrifice, expecting nothing from their union except the satisfaction of duty fulfilled. "Miss, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Giuseppe. You've been very kind to listen to my troubles. What would you want from a marriage if you could have anything, if circumstances were different?" Isabella's voice grew soft, almost wistful. "Partnership, someone who would value my thoughts as much as my appearance. Intellectual companionship, the kind of marriage where two people build something together instead of just occupying the same house. And love. Love would be wonderful, but I've learned not to expect miracles. I would settle for respect, kindness, and the space to pursue my own interests within the marriage." As they pulled up to the restaurant, Lorenzo made a decision that would change both their lives. He would find a way to give Isabella Castellano everything she had just described, but she would have to discover for herself that her future husband was capable of being the man she needed him to be. The question was whether she could ever forgive him for the deception that had made that discovery possible. Over lunch at Café Sabarsky, Isabella Castellano transformed from the composed society bride into someone entirely different. Away from the formal atmosphere of her family's mansion, sitting in the warm, book-lined café with only her driver. As witness, she became animated, thoughtful, and heartbreakingly genuine. Lorenzo, still maintaining his disguise as Giuseppe the driver, had positioned himself at a nearby table with a newspaper, close enough to observe while maintaining the fiction of respectful distance. What he saw made him question everything he thought he knew about arranged marriages and duty-bound relationships. Isabella ordered in perfect German, chatted warmly with the Austrian waitress about Vienna's coffee houses, and spent 20 minutes reading what appeared to be a letter that made her alternately smile and look profoundly sad. "Giuseppe," she called softly, not loudly enough to draw attention from other diners. "Would you join me, please? I hate eating alone, and you must be hungry." Lorenzo hesitated. Maintaining his cover required keeping appropriate distance, but refusing would seem rude and might make Isabella retreat into the formal politeness she used as armor. "That's very kind of you, miss, but it wouldn't be proper." "Proper according to whom? I'm not married yet, and you're not really a servant, are you?" Lorenzo's blood went cold. "I beg your pardon?" Isabella smiled, and this time it reached her eyes completely. "Your hands, Giuseppe. They're soft, well-manicured, and you wear a signet ring that you've turned inward to hide the crest. Your Italian is perfect, but it's northern Italian, educated Italian, not the working-class accent you're affecting. And you've been asking me questions that a professional driver would never presume to ask." Lorenzo felt his carefully constructed deception crumbling around him. "Miss Castellano, please sit down. I promise I won't cause a scene or demand explanations you're not prepared to give. But I would genuinely appreciate the company, and I suspect you might have more interesting conversation than most of the people my family considers suitable companions." Trapped between maintaining his cover and responding to her direct appeal, Lorenzo chose honesty. He moved to her table, removed his chauffeur's cap, and met her eyes directly for the first time. "How long have you known?" "Since we left the museum. You helped me out of the car like someone accustomed to assisting ladies, not like someone who drives for a living. And when I mentioned Professor Marcus, you looked angry rather than sympathetic. Most servants learn to school their expressions. Better? And you're not concerned about being alone with a man who's been deceiving you?" Isabella's smile was sad, but not afraid. "Whoever you really are, you've spent the morning listening to my problems and treating me with more genuine kindness than most people in my actual social circle. If you meant me harm, you've had ample opportunity. What do you think I want from you?" "Information, most likely. About my family. our business interests, my thoughts about the upcoming marriage. The question is whether you're working for Don Benedetto or for someone who opposes the alliance." Lorenzo was quiet for a moment, torn between admiration for her, intelligence and horror at how easily she accepted deception as part of her normal world. "And if I told you I was working for Don Benedetto? Then I'd assume he's more intelligent than most men in his position. Most would rely on their family's reports about their prospective bride's character. A smart man would want to form his own opinions." "You wouldn't be angry, offended by the deception?" Isabella was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Seriously? I'd be impressed, actually. It suggests he cares more about compatibility than appearance, more about character than reputation. Those aren't qualities I expected from my future husband." "Why not?" "Because men with his kind of power rarely need to concern themselves with their wives' thoughts or feelings. They marry for alliance, produce heirs, and find their intellectual and emotional satisfaction elsewhere. The fact that he might actually care who I am as a person, that's more than I dared hope for." Lorenzo felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the cafe's atmosphere and everything to do with the remarkable woman sitting across from him. "And what would you tell him if you could speak to him directly?" Isabella stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "I tell him that I understand this marriage is a business arrangement, but I hope it can become something more than just parallel lives in the same house. I'd tell him that I have my own thoughts and interests, and I hope he'll value those instead of seeing them as inconveniences to be managed." "What else?" "I'd tell him that I'm not afraid of his world, but I am afraid of becoming invisible within it. I've seen too many women in our families turn into expensive decorations, valued for their silence and their ability to produce acceptable heirs. And if he promised you that wouldn't happen, I'd want to know what he meant by that promise. Respect means different things to different people, especially when one person holds all the power in the relationship." Lorenzo leaned forward slightly. "What would respect look like to you?" "Consultation on decisions that affect our household. Freedom to pursue my own interests and friendships. The expectation that I'll participate in conversations rather than simply ornament them. The understanding that my mind is as much a part of what I bring to the marriage as my family connections." "And if he could give you all of that?" Isabella's expression grew wistful. "Then I might discover that arranged marriages can become real partnerships, and duty might transform into something deeper." "Something like love?" "Something like love," she agreed quietly. "Though I've learned not to use that word too freely. It tends to make practical people nervous." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the weight of unspoken possibilities settling between them like snow. Finally, Isabella spoke again. "Giuseppe, or whoever you really are, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think it's possible for two people to build something meaningful together, even when their relationship begins with deception and arrangement rather than choice and honesty?" Lorenzo looked into her eyes, seeing hope and fear in equal measure, and realized that his answer mattered more than any business decision he had ever made. "I think," he said carefully, "that the most important relationships are often the ones that begin in unexpected ways. I think two people who are committed to understanding each other can build something beautiful, regardless of how they first meet, even when one person has significantly more power than the other. Especially then, because it means the powerful person has to choose every day to use that power to protect and elevate their partner rather than control them." Isabella smiled, and Lorenzo felt his heart stop at the radiant beauty of her genuine happiness. "Then perhaps I have more reason to be hopeful about my future than I realized." As they left the cafe together, Lorenzo realized that his deception had revealed something he never expected to find. A woman he could not only respect and protect, but a woman he was already beginning to love. The question now was whether Isabella could forgive him for learning her heart under false pretenses, and whether she could love the real Lorenzo Benedetto as much as she seemed to care for Giuseppe, the mysterious driver. The afternoon shopping expedition down Fifth Avenue revealed layers of Isabella's character that made Lorenzo's deception feel both more necessary and more cruel with each passing hour. As she moved through the elegant boutiques and department stores, he watched her interact with shopgirls and saleswomen with the same courtesy she showed to society matrons, saw her choose gifts for her younger siblings with thoughtful care, and listened to her discuss literature with a bookstore clerk, as if his opinions mattered as much as any professor's. "Giuseppe," she said as they walked between stores, her arms full of packages, "you've been unusually quiet since lunch. Are you having second thoughts about whatever assignment brought you into my life today?" Lorenzo adjusted his grip on the bags he was carrying, still maintaining the fiction of helpful driver while struggling with emotions that threatened to overwhelm his carefully constructed persona. Not second thoughts exactly, more like complications I didn't anticipate. What kind of complications? Lorenzo stopped walking and turned to face her, there on the busy sidewalk, with hundreds of people flowing around them like water around stones in a stream, the kind that make deception feel like betrayal, even when it began with good intentions. Isabella's expression grew serious. "Are you about to tell me something that will change how I understand this day?" "Yes." "And will it hurt?" Lorenzo felt his heart clench at the direct simplicity of her question. "Probably. Then perhaps we should find somewhere more private for this conversation." They walked to Central Park, in silence, heavy with unspoken tension. Isabella led them to a secluded bench overlooking the pond, where families fed ducks and couples walked, hand in hand through the falling leaves. It was beautiful and peaceful and utterly inappropriate for the conversation Lorenzo was about to initiate. "Before you tell me who you really are," Isabella said, settling onto the bench with unconscious grace, "I want you to know that this has been the most honest day I've had in months. Whatever deception brought you into my life, the person you've been with me today has felt more real than most of the authentic relationships I'm expected to maintain. Isabella, let me finish. I know that whoever you are, you'll disappear after today. You'll report back to whoever sent you, and I'll return to my family and my preparations for a marriage to a man I've never met. But I want you to know that you've given me something precious." "What's that?" "Hope. Hope that somewhere in this world of arranged alliances and calculated relationships, there might be room for genuine connection. Hope that the man I'm going to marry might see me as a person rather than just an asset." Lorenzo felt tears sting his eyes behind the thick glasses of his disguise. "And if that hope proves to be justified, if your future husband turned out to be someone who could value you exactly as you deserve, then I would consider myself the luckiest woman in New York, even if he had deceived you to learn who you really were." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, watching the ducks glide across the pond's surface. That would depend on why he chose deception over honesty. And if he chose it because he wanted to meet you as you truly are, not as you felt obligated to present yourself to him, then I would understand his reasoning, even if I couldn't immediately forgive his methods. Lorenzo reached into his jacket and withdrew a small leather wallet. From it, he took a business card and handed it to Isabella. She read it carefully, her expression shifting from curiosity to confusion to dawning recognition. "Lorenzo Benedetto, President, Benedetto Enterprises," she read aloud. "Giuseppe, this is my real name, my real identity, the man you're supposed to marry in 6 weeks." Isabella stared at the card, then at Lorenzo, then back at the card. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with tears. "You're him. You're the stranger I was resigned to marrying." "Yes, and you've spent the entire day listening to me talk about you, about my fears, my expectations, my resignation to a loveless marriage." "Yes." Isabella stood up from the bench and walked several steps away, her back to him, her shoulders rigid with what Lorenzo assumed was anger. "Isabella, please let me explain." "Explain what?" She turned around, and Lorenzo was surprised to see that she was crying. "Explain that every genuine moment we shared today was built on a lie. Explain that you've been cataloguing my weaknesses and insecurities to use against me later. Explain that the one person who seemed to see me as worth listening to was actually the man who holds my entire future in his hands." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Lorenzo? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like an elaborate test that I wasn't told I was taking." Lorenzo stood and moved toward her, but stopped when she held up her hand. "Don't, please. I need to understand this without the confusion of whatever I thought was happening between us today." "What did you think was happening between us?" Isabella's laugh was bitter. "I thought I was talking to someone who had no power over my life, no agenda regarding my future, no reason to pretend interest in my thoughts except genuine curiosity. I thought I had found someone who listened to me without calculating how my words could be used for or against me." "You did find that person?" "No, I found a man who was evaluating whether I would be a suitable wife for him. Everything I told you about my fears, my hopes, my dreams, you were listening as my future husband, not as someone who cared about me as an individual." Lorenzo felt something break inside his chest. "Isabella, that's not true, isn't it? Tell me honestly, Lorenzo. If our conversation today had convinced you that I would be unsuitable as a wife, would our engagement have proceeded as planned?" The question hung in the air between them like a blade. Lorenzo realized that any answer he gave would either be a lie or a confirmation of her worst fears. "I don't know," he said finally. "I'd like to think that what I learned about you today could only make me more certain that marrying you would be the best decision I could make. But you're not certain. I'm certain that you're remarkable. I'm certain that you're intelligent, kind, thoughtful, and stronger than you know. I'm certain that any man would be fortunate to earn your love. But I'm not certain you can. Forgive me for learning those things through deception instead of honest courtship." Isabella wiped tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Why, Lorenzo? Why couldn't you just meet me properly? Get to know me through normal conversation. Let me get to know you as yourself." "Because I needed to know who you were when you weren't performing the role of dutiful daughter or prospective mafia wife. I needed to understand your real thoughts, your authentic self, not the version you'd present to Don Lorenzo Benedetto." "And now that you know?" Lorenzo took a deep breath and decided on complete honesty. "Now I know that I don't just want to marry you for alliance or convenience. I want to marry you because you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. I want to marry you because talking to you today has been the best day I've had in years. I want to marry you because I think I'm falling in love with you, and I hope someday you might fall in love with me." Isabella stared at him for a long moment, tears still streaming down her face. "The cruelest part," she said quietly, "is that I think I was falling in love with you too. With Giuseppe, anyway. With the man who listened to my dreams and made me feel like they mattered. I am that man. Are you? Or are you Don Lorenzo Benedetto, who needed to trick his future wife into honesty because he couldn't trust her to be genuine on her own?" Lorenzo realized there was no good answer to that question, at least not one that Isabella would be ready to hear today. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we go home. I prepare for my wedding to a man I thought I was beginning to understand, and you prepare to marry a woman whose secrets you stole instead of earning." Isabella. I need time, Lorenzo. Time to figure out who you really are, and time to decide whether I can trust someone who thought deception was preferable to honesty. As they walked back to the car in silence, Lorenzo realized that his plan to understand his future wife had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. Unfortunately, the price of that understanding might be the love he had found and lost in the space of a single day. If you're heartbroken by this revelation and desperate to know if Lorenzo and Isabella can overcome this betrayal, please subscribe to support our production costs and see their story through to the end. The ride back to the Castellano mansion was suffocating in its silence. Isabella sat in the back seat, staring out the window, her earlier warmth replaced by a careful politeness that felt like ice forming over deep water. Lorenzo drove with mechanical precision, every turn and stoplight an agony of unspoken regret. "Isabella," he said finally, as they pulled into her family's circular driveway, "please, let me try to explain why There's nothing to explain," she interrupted, her voice steady but distant. "You're a powerful man who wanted information before making a significant business decision. I provided that information unknowingly. The transaction is complete." "It wasn't a transaction. What would you call it?" Lorenzo turned in his seat to face her, abandoning all pretense of being her driver. "I'd call it the day I fell in love with the woman I'm supposed to marry." Isabella's composure cracked slightly. Don't use words like love to justify deception. Love requires trust, Lorenzo. Trust requires honesty. What we had today may have felt like love, but it was built on lies. Not lies about how I felt, not lies about who you are or what you mean to me. Lies about who you were, lies about why you were listening, lies about what my words would cost me. Isabella opened the car door, then paused. "The worst part is that I told Giuseppe things I never would have told Don Lorenzo Benedetto. I was honest with a stranger in ways I never could be with my future husband. Do you understand how that makes me feel? Tell me." "Foolish. Used. Like I gave away something precious to someone who was only pretending to value it." Lorenzo felt each word like a physical blow. "You didn't give it away. I treasured every word you shared with me, every thought, every dream, every fear. They're all precious to me because they're part of you. But you took them under false pretenses. You made me believe I was talking to someone safe, someone who had no power to hurt me with what I revealed. I would never hurt you with anything you told me today." Isabella's laugh was hollow. "You already have. You've hurt me by making me realize that the man I was beginning to care for doesn't actually exist, and the man I'm going to marry is someone I don't know at all." She stepped out of the car, then leaned down to look at him through the window. "Goodbye, Giuseppe. Thank you for showing me what it might feel like to be understood, even if it was only an illusion." Lorenzo watched her walk up the marble steps to her front door, her spine straight and her head high, despite the tears he could see falling. When the door closed behind her, he sat in the empty car and tried to figure out how he had managed to destroy the best thing that had ever happened to him in the space of a single conversation. That evening, Lorenzo paced his study like a caged animal, unable to concentrate on business, unable to eat, unable to think about anything except the look in Isabella's eyes when she realized who he was. His phone rang constantly with calls from associates and family members, but he ignored them all. Finally, his consigliere, Michael Torino, let himself into the study without knocking. "Lorenzo, what the hell happened today?" Isabella's father called 3 times, asking if the engagement is still on. "Her mother is in tears, and you look like someone died." "Maybe someone did," Lorenzo said, pouring himself a whiskey with hands that shook slightly. "Maybe I killed any chance I had of making this marriage work." "Explain," Lorenzo told Michael. "Everything. The disguise, the day spent learning Isabella's thoughts, the growing attraction he had felt, the devastating moment when she realized she had been deceived. Michael listened without interruption, then was quiet for several minutes after Lorenzo finished. "So you found out that your arranged bride is intelligent, beautiful, kind, and perfect for you in every way that matters," Michael said finally. "Yes. And she found out that her arranged groom cared enough about compatibility to spend a day learning who she really was. She found out that I lied to her and manipulated her into honesty. Did you? Or did you create a safe space for her to be herself, and then revealed that the safe space was actually with the person she was supposed to trust most in the world?" Lorenzo looked at his oldest friend. "You think I did the right thing?" "I think you did something unprecedented. Most men in our position marry for alliance and hope for the best. You married for love and tried to make sure it would work. She may never forgive me." "She may not. But Lorenzo, the woman you described today, does she sound like someone who would hold a grudge against someone who genuinely cares about her happiness?" "She sounds like someone who deserves better than what I gave her today." "Then give her better. Give her the honesty you should have started with. Give her the respect she was asking for. Give her a choice about whether to proceed with the marriage now that she knows who you really are." Lorenzo set down his whiskey glass. "And if she chooses to end the engagement, then you'll know you loved her enough to let her go. And if she chooses to stay, you'll know it's because she wants to build something real with the actual you, not with Giuseppe the driver." 3 days later, Lorenzo stood outside the Castellano mansion with a bouquet of white roses and a heart full of apologies he wasn't sure he deserved to have accepted. He had traded his chauffeur's uniform for an expensive suit, his fake mustache, and glasses for his own face, and his deceptive confidence for genuine humility. The butler who answered the door looked surprised to see him. "Don Benedetto, we weren't expecting you. I'd like to see Miss Isabella. If she's willing to see me, I'll inquire, sir." Lorenzo waited in the formal parlor, surrounded by oil paintings and antique furniture that spoke of old money and older traditions. When Isabella appeared in the doorway 15 minutes later, she looked composed but wary. "Lorenzo," she said formally, "this is unexpected." "I know. I hope you'll give me a few minutes to say something I should have said 3 days ago." Isabella remained in the doorway, not approaching but not leaving either. "What's that?" "I'm sorry, not just for deceiving you, but for handling this entire situation badly from the beginning. You deserved honesty and I gave you manipulation. You deserved respect and I gave you theater. And now I'm asking if you'll let me start over. Let me court you properly as myself, so you can decide whether Lorenzo Benedetto is someone you could care for the way you were beginning to care for Giuseppe." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to determine whether this new honesty was another performance. "And if I said no? If I said the engagement should be cancelled, then I'd respect your decision and find another way to handle the alliance between our families. Your happiness matters more to me than any business arrangement. Even though breaking our engagement would complicate things politically, even then." Isabella moved further into the room, sitting in a chair across from where he stood. "Why, Lorenzo? Why does my happiness matter to you when we barely know each other? Because in one day spent with you, I learned that you're the kind of person I want to spend my life getting to know better. Because your thoughts are more interesting than most people's actions. Because you have a way of looking at the world that makes me want to see it through your eyes. And because I fell in love with you when I thought I was just gathering information, and I can't imagine going back to the life I had before I knew you existed." Isabella was quiet for so long that Lorenzo began to think she wouldn't respond at all. Finally, she looked up at him with eyes that held both pain and possibility. "I was falling in love with you too," she said quietly, "with the man who listened to my dreams and made me feel like they mattered. But I don't know if that man was real or if he was just another performance." He was real. Everything I felt, everything I thought about what you shared with me, all of that was completely real. "Then prove it. How?" Isabella stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where she had played as a child. "Court me, Lorenzo, not as Don Benedetto securing an alliance, but as a man trying to win a woman's heart. Show me that the person I was falling in love with exists in the real you, not just in the character you played. And if I can do that, if I can show you that Giuseppe and Lorenzo are the same person." Isabella turned to face him, and Lorenzo saw hope beginning to compete with wariness in her expression. "Then maybe we can build something real together. Maybe we can turn an arranged marriage into a love story." "I'd like that more than anything else in the world." "Then let's start over, Lorenzo. Let's see if we can fall in love with each other's real selves this time." As Lorenzo left the Castellano mansion that evening, he realized that Isabella had given him the most precious gift imaginable, a second chance to earn her heart honestly. The question now was whether he was worthy of the opportunity she was offering. The courtship that followed was unlike anything either Lorenzo or Isabella had expected from their arranged marriage. Instead of formal dinner parties and chaperoned visits, Lorenzo found himself trying to win Isabella's heart through small gestures, honest conversations, and the kind of vulnerability that went against every instinct his world had taught him. "You don't have to bring me flowers every day," Isabella said one morning, accepting a bouquet of yellow roses from Lorenzo as he arrived for another carefully planned day together. "Though I admit I'm running out of vases. I bring them because I want to, not because I have to," Lorenzo replied, noting how her smile seemed more genuine than it had been the week before. "Besides, Giuseppe mentioned that yellow roses were your favorites." Isabella's expression grew thoughtful. "You're doing it again." "What?" Referring to Giuseppe as if he were someone else, as if the man who spent that day with me was separate from you. Lorenzo settled into the chair across from her in the Castellano family's morning room, a space that had become familiar over the past 2 weeks of proper courtship. Because sometimes it feels like he was someone else, someone braver than I am, someone better at saying the right things, or someone who felt safe being honest because he thought there would be no consequences for that honesty. "Is that what you think? That I was only genuine with you because I thought I could walk away?" Isabella was quiet for a moment, arranging the roses in a crystal vase with careful precision. "I think Giuseppe could afford to fall in love with me because he didn't have to worry about whether loving me would complicate his business or his family relationships. Lorenzo Benedetto doesn't have that luxury. You're wrong about that." "Am I?" Lorenzo leaned forward, his expression serious. "Isabella, falling in love with you doesn't complicate my life. It simplifies it. It makes every other decision easier. Because now I know what I'm trying to protect, what I'm trying to build toward. And what about the parts of your world that aren't compatible with love? The violence, the danger, the moral compromises?" It was the question Lorenzo had been dreading, the conversation they hadn't been able to have during his masquerade, because Giuseppe, the driver, wouldn't have been expected to understand the realities of organized crime. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. If I'm going to marry you, if I'm going to build a life with you, I need to understand what that life will actually look like." Lorenzo stood and walked to the window, gathering his thoughts. "My business has 2 sides, Isabella. The legitimate enterprises, restaurants, construction, import-export operations that provide income and employment for hundreds of people. And the other side, Tell me about the other side. Protection services for businesses that can't rely on police. Mediation of disputes that can't go through official channels. Enforcement of agreements that aren't recognized by conventional law. You mean extortion, illegal gambling, and violence. Lorenzo turned to face her, appreciating her directness even as it made the conversation more difficult. Sometimes, yes. When negotiation fails, when people threaten what we're trying to protect, when the alternative is chaos that hurts innocent people. And you personally, do you personally commit violence? When necessary? When there's no other way to protect my family or innocent people who depend on us? Isabella was quiet for several minutes, processing what he had told her. Have you killed people, Lorenzo? Yes. Many people? Fewer than my reputation suggests, but more than I wish I could have avoided. And you're asking me to marry someone who has blood on his hands. I'm asking you to marry someone who uses violence only when it's the only way to prevent greater violence. I'm asking you to trust that I will never let that world touch you directly, and that I will always choose the path that minimizes harm to innocent people. Isabella moved to stand beside him at the window. What about children, Lorenzo? If we have children, how do we protect them from your world while still being honest about what their father does? We raise them to understand the difference between necessary and unnecessary violence. We teach them that power comes with responsibility, that strength should be used to protect people who can't protect themselves. We give them choices I never had about whether to be part of this life. And if they choose differently, if they want nothing to do with the family business, then we support their choices and make sure they're safe to pursue whatever life they want. Isabella was quiet for a long time, staring out at the garden where they could see her younger siblings playing. Finally, she spoke. Lorenzo, I need you to understand something about me. What's that? I'm not naive about what our world is like. I've grown up in it. I've seen what happens to families who can't protect themselves, and I understand why sometimes violence is the only language certain people understand. But I need to know that the man I marry will exhaust every other option before resorting to violence. I need to know that he'll never use his power to hurt people unnecessarily, and that he'll always remember that every life he affects is someone's son or daughter, husband or wife. I can promise you that. Can you? Even when you're angry, even when someone threatens our family, even when the easy solution would be to eliminate a problem permanently. Lorenzo took her hands in his, noting how naturally she had said our family, as if their future together was becoming real to her. Isabella, the day I met you as Giuseppe, you told me that you were afraid of becoming invisible in your marriage. Let me tell you what I'm afraid of. What? I'm afraid of becoming the kind of man who justifies terrible things by calling them necessary. I'm afraid of losing myself so completely in power and control that I forget why I wanted power in the first place. And why did you want it? To protect the people I love, to build something that lasts, to make sure that people in our community have someone to turn to when the system fails them. Isabella studied his face, searching for deception or self-justification. And now that you have that power, now I want to use it to build the kind of life where our children can choose to be better than we are. I want to use it to create something worthy of the woman I'm hoping will agree to share it with me. Lorenzo, I know I can't promise you a life without danger. I can't promise you that there won't be times when I have to make choices that keep you awake at night. But I can promise you that I will always try to be the man you fell in love with, even when that's the harder choice. Isabella was quiet for so long that Lorenzo began to wonder if he had said too much, been too honest about the darkness that sometimes surrounded his decisions. The night my father told me about our engagement, she said finally. I cried myself to sleep thinking about marrying a stranger who might treat me like property. Then I spent a day with Giuseppe and started to hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find happiness even in an arranged marriage. And now? Now I'm wondering if it's possible to love someone despite knowing terrible things about them, if it's possible to build a life with someone whose world includes violence and moral complexity. What do you think? Isabella turned to face him fully, her hands still in his. I think that loving someone means accepting all of them, not just the parts that are easy to love. I think that if I'm going to be your wife, I need to understand and accept your world, even the parts that frighten me. And can you do that? I don't know yet, but I want to try, Lorenzo, because what I felt with Giuseppe was real, and what I'm feeling with you feels real too, and I think real love is worth fighting for. Lorenzo lifted her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. Then let's keep learning about each other. Let's keep building something real, and let's see if we can turn this arranged marriage into the love story we both want it to be. There's one more thing I need from you, Isabella said. Anything. I need you to promise that you'll never lie to me again, not to protect me, not to avoid difficult conversations, not for any reason. If we're going to make this work, it has to be built on complete honesty, I promise, Lorenzo said without hesitation. No more deceptions, no more characters, no more protecting you from truths you deserve to know. Then ask me again, Lorenzo. Ask me properly this time. Ask you what? Ask me to marry you, not because our families arranged it, not because it's expected, but because you want me to be your wife, and you want to be my husband. Lorenzo dropped to one knee there in the morning room, still holding her hands, his heart racing with the magnitude of what he was about to ask. Isabella Castellano, will you marry me? Not because you have to, not because it's been arranged, but because you choose to build a life with me, because you're willing to love the real me, and because you'll let me spend the rest of my life earning the right to love the real you. Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. Yes, Lorenzo, I choose to marry you. I choose to love you. I choose to build something real with you, starting right now. As Lorenzo stood and kissed her for the first time, he realized that sometimes the most important journeys begin with deception, but end with truth. Begin with arrangement, but end with choice. Begin with strangers, but end with soulmates. The man, who had posed as a driver to learn his bride's heart, had discovered something far more valuable. He had learned his own heart in the process. 6 months later, the Benedetto estate had been transformed into something that looked like a fairy tale, with white roses climbing every column and golden lights strung through trees that whispered with autumn wind. But the real magic wasn't in the decorations or the expensive champagne or the orchestra playing soft Italian melodies. The real magic was in the faces of two people who had found love in the most unexpected way imaginable. Isabella stood before her mirror in the bridal suite, wearing a dress that had taken seamstresses 3 months to create, its silk and lace designed to make her look like a princess from a Renaissance painting. But her beauty that day came from something deeper than expensive fabric or perfect makeup. It came from the radiant happiness of a woman who was marrying exactly the man she wanted to marry. "Nervous?" asked her sister Maria, fastening the pearl necklace that had belonged to their grandmother around Isabella's neck. "Not nervous," Isabella replied, studying her reflection. "Excited. For the first time in my life, I'm walking towards something I chose, rather than something that was chosen. For me, even knowing what you know about Lorenzo's world, about the dangers that come with loving him," Isabella turned from the mirror to face her sister. "Especially knowing those things, because I'm not marrying an illusion or a fantasy. I'm marrying a man I understand completely, whose flaws I accept and whose strengths I admire. And you trust him? With my life, with our future, with everything that matters to me. Downstairs, in what had once been Lorenzo's study and was now a groom's preparation room, a similar conversation was taking place between Lorenzo and Michael. "Any second thoughts?" Michael asked, adjusting Lorenzo's boutonniere with the careful precision of someone who had been through this process before. "Only about whether I deserve her," Lorenzo replied, checking his appearance one final time. "Whether someone with my history, my complications, my moral ambiguities has the right to ask someone like Isabella to share his life." "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That desert isn't the point. The point is whether I can love her well enough to make her happy she chose me. Whether I can be the husband she needs me to be, not just today, but every day for the rest of our lives." "And can you?" Lorenzo smiled, and Michael noted that it was the first completely unguarded expression he had seen on his friend's face in years. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life finding out." The ceremony took place in the garden as the sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and rose that made the assembled guests look like figures from a classical painting. Isabella walked down the aisle on her father's arm, but her eyes were fixed entirely on Lorenzo, who waited for her at an altar decorated with white roses and trailing ivy. When she reached him, when her father placed her hand in Lorenzo's with a blessing that sounded more like a prayer than a formality, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. There were 300 guests in attendance, but Isabella and Lorenzo might as well have been alone. "Dearly beloved," began Father Benedetto, Lorenzo's uncle who had flown in from Sicily specifically to perform this ceremony, "we gather today to witness something remarkable. Not just the union of two families, though that alliance will benefit many people. Not just the joining of two business interests, though that partnership will create opportunities and security. We gather to witness the triumph of choice over circumstance, of love over arrangement, of truth over convenience." Isabella felt tears prick her eyes as she realized how perfectly the priest had captured what their marriage represented. "Lorenzo," Father Benedetto continued, "do you take Isabella not because you must, but because you choose to? Not because others have decided, but because your heart has decided?" "I do," Lorenzo said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I choose her today and every day for the rest of my life." "And Isabella, do you take Lorenzo not from duty, but from desire? Not from obligation, but from love freely given?" "I do," Isabella replied, her voice clear as music. "I choose him with my whole heart, knowing exactly who he is and loving him completely." As they exchanged rings, as they promised to honor and cherish each other through whatever challenges lay ahead, Isabella remembered the scared young woman who had sat in a car 6 months ago, resigned to marrying a stranger. That woman felt like someone from another lifetime. "You may kiss your bride," Father Benedetto announced, and when Lorenzo lifted Isabella's veil and looked into her eyes, she saw there not the calculating stranger she had feared marrying, but the man who had fallen in love with her thoughts before he ever touched her hand. The kiss was soft, reverent, full of promise. When they separated, both of them were crying. The reception that followed was joyous in ways that surprised everyone present. These were people accustomed to formal social gatherings that served political purposes, but this celebration felt genuinely festive. Isabella and Lorenzo moved through their guests with the easy happiness of people who had nothing to hide, nothing to pretend, nothing to regret. "So," said Vincent Torino, one of Lorenzo's business associates, approaching the couple during the dinner hour, "how does it feel to be married to someone you actually chose?" "Revolutionary," Isabella replied with a smile. "I recommend it highly. And potentially dangerous," Lorenzo added. When you marry someone you love, you give them the power to destroy you completely, but also the power to make you stronger than you ever imagined you could be, Isabella finished. As the evening progressed, as they danced their first dance, to a song about love that transcends circumstances, as they accepted congratulations from people who understood they were witnessing something unusual in their world, Isabella realized that their unconventional beginning had led them to the most conventional of endings, true love. "Mrs. Benedetto," Lorenzo whispered in her ear as they swayed to the music, "do you remember what you told Giuseppe about wanting a marriage built on partnership?" "I remember. Are you ready to build that partnership? Are you ready to be equals in this complicated, dangerous, beautiful life we're choosing together?" Isabella pulled back to look at his face, seeing in his eyes the same devotion she had glimpsed in Giuseppe, the driver, but deeper now, more real, backed by months of honest courtship and genuine choice. "I've been ready since the day I realized that Giuseppe and Lorenzo were the same person, just in different costumes," she said. "I've been ready since I understood that the man I fell in love with was always you. Even the parts of me that aren't easy to love, especially those parts, because they make you human instead of perfect, real instead of idealized." As the music ended, and they prepared to begin their new life together, Lorenzo realized that his deception had ultimately led them to the most honest relationship either of them had ever imagined. He had learned Isabella's heart by pretending to be someone else, but she had learned his heart by insisting that he be completely himself. "No more masks," he said as they prepared to leave their reception. "No more deceptions. No more hiding." Isabella agreed. "From now on, just the truth, even when it's difficult, even when it's complicated, even when it's inconvenient." "Just the truth," Lorenzo promised. "And just love." As their car pulled away from the estate, heading toward a honeymoon in Italy, where Isabella would see the villages of Lorenzo's childhood, and he would show her the art that had first made him understand beauty, they both understood that they had achieved something remarkable. They had turned an arranged marriage into a love story. They had transformed deception into trust. They had chosen each other freely, completely, and forever. The driver's masquerade was over. The real marriage had begun, and somewhere in the back of Isabella's mind, she realized that she would probably never hear Giuseppe's name again without smiling, because Giuseppe had been the bridge that led her to Lorenzo, and Lorenzo was the man she would love for the rest of her life. Sometimes, she thought, the most beautiful truths are discovered through the most complicated lies. Sometimes the heart needs to be tricked into revealing itself before it can be trusted with someone else's heart in return. And sometimes, just sometimes, arranged marriages become the greatest love stories of all. Thank you for following Lorenzo and Isabella's complex journey from deception to truth, from arrangement to choice, from heartbreak to healing. If you were moved by their story of finding real love through the most unexpected circumstances, please subscribe to help support our production efforts and bring you more compelling tales of love conquering all obstacles.